Hi, everyone. I'm Steve here again with Dr. Nario. Thanks for being here, Dr. Nario.
Hi, Steve. Thank you for having me again. Always a pleasure.
So, we're going to talk about Alzheimer's and dementia. First, you guys know if you want to know more about Dr. Nario, you can go to Biointegrative Health Center online and find out more about all the things that they do at the clinic. So, when we talked about this topic, one of the first things I was wondering is Alzheimer and dementia, is it more prevalent, do you think, now than it was 30 years ago?
Steve, that's a good question, really. So that's why I really want to kind of maybe open up that conversation by pointing out facts or even numbers or statistics out there for our viewers to understand. For example, the incidence of these are 2024 statistics. Incidence of Alzheimer's, actually 10% of those over 65 uh, has it. And then there's another category called mild cognitive impairment, which is, of course, I guess, a pre-stage before going to Alzheimer's. And anybody over 65 years old, 12 to 18% will develop that. And this is according to the Alzheimer's Association for this year, actually. The thing here is, you would notice how they gave definitions. When they defined cognitive decline, it says that the self reported experience of worsening or more frequent confusion or memory loss. I mean, that's almost everybody that I see. And again, with mild cognitive impairment, the definition of that would be worsening forgetfulness, losing track of conversations, lack of judgment, depression, and short tempered. I mean, this is almost like everybody's having these symptoms. And that's why when you are diagnosed with mild cognitive impairment, 45% of these will develop into Alzheimer's disease. But again, this can be undiagnosed. This can remain stable for years before it just goes out of proportion. And when you're diagnosed with MCI, there's already a brain pathology, meaning the brain is starting to change. And when you talk about Alzheimer's, of course, this is the severe form of this brain decline, which is almost altering your daily activities of living. And again, 10% of 50-year-olds are positive already for amyloid plaques in the brain, but again, no standard on how to treat this. So, giving you that answer, hopefully, as you can see, it's very prevalent now as 2024 sets in, and from the years way back, you can definitely see that this is not a trend that is now currently on the uprise, and it's almost like an epidemic of proportions in our world.
Yeah, so we're going to talk about some prevention techniques or ideas that you have, but you kind of got me fascinated on this. Do you think that 50 years ago we were just less aware of this and now we're just everyone's all paying attention to it and putting it into statistics, or was this normal 50 years ago?
Well, the thing there is, Steve,
Your
you have to,
opinion, you know what I mean? What's your
yeah.
opinion on this?
Well, the thing here is you have to remember that I think it's because of, again, the world that we live in, the evolving surroundings and environment that we have. And why is that? Because as I discuss the possible causes, you would notice here that I will mention about heavy metals and toxins and chemicals. And also part of that would be deficiencies in nutrients. And as we know, for example, vitamin B, magnesium, C, D, and E are all important for brain function, which are contributory to brain decline. And as we now process our food, and as the sources where we get it from are not as reliable as before, then it actually becomes more prevalent. And another one would be, so you're talking about, is it from then to now? Let's talk about COVID brains. COVID brains are actually now being proven as part of studies that it actually has manifested to have a higher chance of acceleration of dementia and even brain function when somebody had what we call post COVID now. And that's why it's something that we still need to see where it's going to go, because as we know, COVID is still on the rise. So that's why I'm attributing this to the changing of times. I don't think cavemen probably they probably had less of a chance having brain decline just because there's so many things that stimulates their brain, and there's so many natural things and how they protect it. But now we lose all of those, and because of our lifestyle, the choices that we make makes us more prone to this condition.
Yeah, I'm not the doctor, but it just seems like I wasn't sure if you were thinking that we're just talking about this more, or is this becoming more prevalent? And it seems like it would be. Again, I'm not the doctor, but with all the processed foods and, you know, the junk in our water and the air and everything, that it would affect us, not only our minds and our brains, but other things. So anyway, I was just curious about that. So let's talk about what we can do now to help prevent this, because you said this can start like at age 60, and you said it starts in most people. Is that what you said, age 60?
Well, really, when I talk about changing in the brain function, so 60 is kind of like your benchmark when cognitive decline is already prominent. Through conversation, you would hear patients saying, "Yeah, I'm forgetting. Yeah, names, right? Names is usually the first one." But on studies, really, the pathologies or brain changes, they use the mitochondria to assess this. When your mitochondria starts to change, now you could actually correlate this to non-clinical evident brain dysfunction, or it's upcoming. It's like your warning sign. And with your mitochondria being already altered, they noted that changes are occurring already at 50, even like 40 years old. Sorry, 40 years old is kind of like the benchmark when they saw that these mitochondria that we have, which is 90% of the cell's energy and actually being used by almost any organ in the system, that it delivers amounts of ATP for that. And that's when I say that, all right, we're not going to be waiting for 50 or 60 years old before we do something about this. Even the young person can actually have proactive approaches. And as I mentioned to you, it's very hard to measure mitochondrial function. There are only few direct tests that are out there, and some of them are even research, such as like GDF-15, ME screen, and the mito swab. So these are things now that can assess your mitochondria indirectly, and they're pretty pricey. That's why I always tell patients, hey, if you don't want to pay that test, you always want to be preventative.
So let's talk about some of the things that maybe you do with your patients when you're thinking about preventing this. You said, okay, you're seeing changes maybe as early as 40, but so
Hmm.
what do you recommend to your patients, or what do you do, or what do you do for yourself, um, to be aware of this and help prevent this, or at least slow it down? What do you do?
Right. The thing here, Steve, is always assessment. You need to always keep an eye on something that's progressing. But the challenge with Alzheimer's is there's no standard of diagnostic testing when you want to look at the brain. That's why we use indirect testing, such as blood testing. Blood testing contributes a lot to this the witch hunt that we have. And as I mentioned to you, like thyroid testing, vitamins levels, metals and toxins that we have, even chemicals and pesticides. So that's why that's something that we definitely want to utilize, and also the neurocognitive testings that we have. So you would see a neurologist; they'll ask you questions. MMSE is what we call it, or MoCA scores. So these are the ones that we initially use, and you go so far and beyond when you talk about doing PET scans, and even which is the gold standard really to look at amyloid plaques, because you have to remember they're pretty expensive, and also like spinal taps. You're going to get spinal fluid from the spine to assess that. And there are also testing for actual amyloid plaques now. This is the groundbreaking news here, that you can do a blood test that can actually do this. But you have to remember this is it gets a little expensive when these are new. And one of the tests is actually by research. The name of the test is Precivity 82, and you can actually get this from your regular LabCorp or Quest test. and also APS2 ratio. This is, again, this is the one that I was telling you, that's a research test only for Alzheimer's. And also the other ones like ApoE gene, MTHFR. So it's really all about you utilizing your tools in assessment or testing to see what the environment is for this patient in terms of how high of a chance they will produce or lead to Alzheimer's dementia.
So, is there something that you can do for your patients or recommend? Like, if they get a test and it doesn't come out favorable,
Hmm.
um, can you change people's diet? Can you change their lifestyle?
Hmm.
Is there are there things that they can do?
Right. There is. And it all I mean, it goes back, Steve, to the risk factors of what actually will produce memory loss or poor cognition for patients. There's some of the things that I always hear would be, of course, deficiencies in magnesium and B vitamins. So these are the ones that you want to focus on. Nutrients, not only directly through supplements, but also through food. And then food allergies, food reactions. People who have more food reactions, like for the ones who just can't eat almost anything, they have a higher chance of developing this because there's just so much gut inflammation there, reflecting brain inflammation as well. Blood sugar problems going up and down. You like your CGMs. If you're the one who actually fluctuates the most, you will have more brain pathologies. Why? Because your brain eats glucose. It's using that to create energy. And it also, when you talk about you're getting a lot of infections, the sickly type, right, means that your immune system's down. Thus, your protection in the brain and also the immune system in the brain is down. People undergoing menopause, you have to make sure you assist these people with hormones as early as possible. And also, as I mentioned to you, aluminum, lead, and even mercury. But here's one thing though that I want to kind of bring up, especially as I see this in my patients. Hearing impairment and visual impairment actually contributes to the acceleration of brain dysfunction. Why is that? And I would remind you, you probably know people about this specific scenario. I don't want to wear my hearing aids. It's a discomfort. It doesn't fit. It falls. It doesn't work. The thing here is, if you don't wear those hearing aids, your brain stimulation is gone. If you can't hear anything, it's less. And even for glasses, you don't want to change your glasses. You can't see anything, can't read. The visual stimulation is gone for that brain to grow and to actually prevent its deterioration. So these little things, I mean, not yet. We're not in the discussion of replacing anything yet. As you can see, behavioral changes in this aspect can help a lot in the prevention aspect of Alzheimer's.
Well, there's a couple simple things, but it sure does make sense
Mm-hmm.
because of how your brain works when you're visualizing things or you're looking at
Yep.
things and when you're hearing things and you're processing, you're exercising your brain
Right.
with those two things, right? So that kind of makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously, I mean, you talked about metals a couple times. What about detoxing? Like I know at the clinic you do a lot of different detox treatments, chelation, and so on. It sounds like that might be a benefit from what you're saying. If these heavy metals can start to affect our brains, wouldn't detoxing protocols be a benefit?
Yes, definitely. That's why I always tell patients that detox is not only because you drank a lot of last night from a party, or it was the holidays, you ate too much. Detox is an everyday maintenance thing. The reason why is every day as you get out of that door, you're just exposing yourself to the air we breathe, the things that we touch, the things that we eat, that we put in our bodies, the infections that we get. And this is the reason why not only aluminum, lead, mercury, and definitely those are big players because they like to stay in the brain, and that's why we want to get them as early as possible while they're in the blood, so they won't be lodging in the brain tissue to create damage. But the thing is, you're right. I always promote, and I do myself, recurrent or a maintenance detox, as we call it. And that's why there's no specific period that you give yourself a rest. You cycle, as we call it, but it's a constant thing that you would notice that. You just hear so many bad things about the surroundings around you, and more reason for you to have a motivation to actually clean yourself up through other methods.
Yeah, no, that's great. And it's that's why to me it's helpful. And you and I have known each other for years now, and sometimes I'll ask you, "What do you do?" you
Right.
know, because that um, that's something that you know, if you're doing it, there must be some value behind it.
Hmm.
So that's always a question I like to ask you. Now, it also seems like just common sense to me that keeping your diet as clean as possible, clean water, clean diet, clean air, as clean as you can get it, and exercise is going to help. I mean, that's going to help your body function better. It's going to help your body detox. It's going to help it work better. It's going to help everything. So those two important things, exercise and diet,
Hmm.
the best diet, it seems like those are two no-brainers that would help here.
Right. Well, Steve, just to go back to your point, let me give some our viewers some fun facts here. That, and I feel bad for people living in urban cities. It's just that 51% of autopsied brain samples in air polluted cities where individual lives in actually exhibited a high number of amyloid plaques. That's why, as you can see, as I tell you, that you just step out through the door, and that's not any of your control anymore. If you're living in
Right.
that urbanized like New York, unfortunately, Los Angeles, right? It's just like the fast car just blew smoke in front of you, so you don't have any control of that. This is an example, and now, as you can see, it's a 50% and even higher. That is a lot of load for the brain to take.
Yeah, well, fascinating. So, um, okay, so before we go, any last tips or suggestions for our audience?
Yeah. The thing here is, I always, as I mentioned to you before, we always want to think about the mitochondria. So if you look at the brain, man, that's a lot of tissue to treat. That's a lot of surface area to look into. I always want you to look at the microscopic aspect of everything. Mitochondria is key. Keep that mitochondria going, and that brain will actually be functioning better. And how do we do that? The best supplements out there would be omegas. You have to remember because our brain is our what we call made up of fat tissues. B vitamins. The reason why I say B vitamins, there was an actual study that was done on the brain, or like they took brain tissue, and they saw that there are a lot of vitamin B receptors around brain tissue that will suck in all the vitamins because it has brain mitochondria that really works a lot to create a lot of energy. And of course, glucose control, blood sugar. As I told you, that's the food of our brains. Magnesium, and even, of course, good antioxidants such as vitamin C, E, genistein, which is a soy flavonoid, curcumin, ergothioneine, which is found in mushrooms, NAC or glutathione. And as I mentioned to you, at age 40, you really want to focus on, maybe I should start supplements. And I want to explain to everybody here that the brain is a very oxidative organ. Why is that? Every time you think, you just want to solve a math problem, you're creating a lot of oxidative stress. So even by you living the healthiest life, just you being an intellectual brings a lot of damage to your brain already. And that's where oxidative stress and antioxidants comes into the picture. And when I mentioned omega-3 fatty acids, this is actually something that not only makes your brain robust in tissue, but it's also a very potent antioxidant. And when you talk about good omega, I guess sources of omega threes and six, krill oil actually has a better outcome versus fish oil if you're going to focus on brain. But fish oil is something I recommend mostly for cardiovascular. So if somebody's going to be taking fish oil here or krill oil, you have to make sure you have vitamin B's. The reason for that, it increases absorption of these omegas that I'm talking about. And also, when you mentioned about ketogenic diets, that's the reason why in Alzheimer's protocols you would hear that, hey, do a ketogenic diet. And that's why MCT drinks, at least 30 grams for 6 months, improve cognition of mild cognitive impaired patients. And also, one thing that's in the rise, We spoke about GLP-1s before, like in Wegovy or Zempic. It's actually getting traction to show that when somebody's using GLP-1 agonist, it actually lower the rates of cognitive decline. And the subjects here were actually diabetics who were actually using it. So, oh, and before I this is my favorite because I treat a lot of hormone patients. The worse the hot flash of a female, the more brain damage or the more accelerated the cognitive decline of that female would be if not addressed quickly.
Wow. And I mean, everything you said, like I said, I've learned a lot in the number of years we've been doing this. NMN, that's going to help. NAD, which is going to
Mhm.
help your brain, right?
Right?
And NR, which is something
That's
that
right.
you've prescribed for me.
That is correct.
Okay. Well, we appreciate those are some great tips, Dr. Nario. As always, thank you for being here. You guys can check out Biointegrative Health Center and see what they do there. Thanks for being with us, Doctor.
Steve, thank you again for having me. As you all know, knowledge is power, and thank you for letting me provide you with edge on longevity and health maintenance, which I call the biological edge or the bio edge.